Welcome to the League of American Bicyclists Setting Speeds for Health and Safety webinar. This webinar is part of the League's ongoing Slow Roads Save Lives campaign, which calls on everyone to embrace slowing down and saving lives. This webinar will focus on speed limit reform, highlighting successful legislation that allows lower speed limits and reports that provide guidance on how to implement safer speeds. We have a really great group of speakers today. I guess starting with myself, I'm Ken McLeod. I'm the policy director for the League of American Bicyclists. We will also have Jenny O'Connell, who is the Associate Director of Programs for the National Association of City Transportation Officials, or NACTO. And we are very honored to have two elected officials on our call today who have successfully advocated for legislation that allows lower speed limits. So we have Rozia J.R. Henson, a delegate from Virginia, my state, and we have New York State Senator Brad Hoylman-Sigal, and we also have Amy Cohen with Families for Safe Streets, who is involved in the New York legislation. Delegate Henson, I believe you are on the call. Can you turn on your camera or turn on your audio and briefly talk about why you advocated for slower speed limits and what excites you about that bill?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Delegate Rozia A. Henson Jr.
Having some audio visual difficulties. We'll see if he comes back. I'm gonna give space to Senator Brad Hoylman-Sigal as that hopefully works out.
Hi, it's good to see everyone, and I'm sure the delegate will be back on soon. I'm State Senator Brad Hoylman-Sigal. I represent the west side of Manhattan, one of the most traffic congested and perilous places to be a pedestrian or cyclist or even motorist here in New York City. It runs from Christopher Street, home of the historic Stonewall Inn, birthplace of the modern LGBTQ human rights movement, all the way up to West 103rd. I am the proud sponsor of Sammy's Law, and that was a bill that we passed just this year in New York after years and years of persistent championing, advocacy, on the part of an amazing group of advocates known as Families for Safe Streets, from the leader, founder, co-founder, of whom you'll be hearing from shortly. I could not be more proud and happier as the senator, but also as a parent of two young children, that with the help of such relentless, determined advocates, we were finally able to lower, in effect, New York City's mandatory minimum speed limit, which was 25 miles per hour. That could not be changed in New York City unless the state capitol up in Albany, hundreds of miles away, intervened. But we did it. And for too long, there had been too many New Yorkers seriously injured or killed by speeding vehicles. Last year alone, 259 New Yorkers died in traffic-related crashes. 104 of those killed were pedestrians. On top of that, the city is becoming increasingly dangerous for cyclists. Last year, there were 29 cyclists killed in traffic-related incidents in New York City, the highest since New York City's Vision Zero program started to tackle these issues and started tracking this data. That has been unacceptable. That's why for years we've been pushing for New York City to be able to control its own speed limits. And throughout that time, New York City elected officials from our mayor and our city council members have been clear. They want to be able to lower the speed limit and protect pedestrians, seniors, young people, and everyone else across the city, because we know that for a fact, lower speed limits save lives. Within a year of the last time New York City lowered its speed limit in 2014, traffic fatalities fell by more than 22%, and pedestrian fatalities fell by more than 25%. And researchers found that the crash rate decreases by 4 to 6% for every 1 mile per hour reduction in speed. Now that Sammy's Law is official, I can proudly say that we have finally removed the roadblock, no pun intended, that prevents New York City from further reducing its own speed limits. And I'm confident that the city will do just that. And I'm confident that we will save lives. When we introduced this common sense traffic legislation, we did so in memory of a wonderful young man named Sammy Cohen Eckstein. He was a bright man who was struck and fatally just a few months shy of his 13th birthday. And since that tragic crash, his mother, who is on with us today, Amy Cohen, has been a firebrand for safe streets throughout the entire city, namely through the organization that I mentioned, Families for Safe Streets. She has inspired countless individuals who've lost loved ones to traffic violence, not only to advocate for new traffic policies that are going to save lives, but to simply have the strength to continue after such unimaginable loss. And I speak for all New Yorkers when I say that, Amy, we owe you the deepest debt of gratitude, and to everyone for family and Families for Safe Streets, Transportation Alternatives, and all the other advocates who've pushed for this law, for helping change the paradigm of traffic safety in Albany. So thank you so much. And I know those of you on this webinar who have experienced the loss of a loved one due to traffic violence know that nothing can ever make up for that loss. But I hope that you can at least take the smallest amount of solace in the fact that because of the work you've done, future generations of New Yorkers will have a safer New York City. Thank you for inviting me today. This is such an important topic. I look forward to discussing it with colleagues across the country. This needs to be a national movement. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for those comments, and thank you for joining us. I truly agree it needs to be a national movement, and the way that states right now prevent cities from implementing slower speed limits just absolutely needs to be solved. So it's great that it's been done in New York, and hopefully we can do it everywhere.
Thanks, Ken.
So I think we might be able to try Delegate Henson again. He may not be able to join us by video, but hopefully we'll try the audio.
Can you
and
hear
see
me?
if that works. I do.
Awesome. Sorry about that. And I do apologize for not having my video on, but you gotta love technology. And one thing I love better than technology is when senators come with data and the facts. So in Virginia, funny enough, Delegate Betsy Carr had House Bill 1071, and then I had House Bill 793 as it related to allowing localities to lower speed limits beyond 25 miles per hour and no less than 15 miles per hour. So the way the Virginia General Assembly works is you cannot have two of the same bills go beyond the standing committee. So, we did whatever all other legislators will do. We had a boxing match, and she came out on top, and I decided, and we both decided for me to be the chief co-patron, since this was something that she was fighting on way beyond me becoming delegate. So in my district, I represent the eastern side of Prince William County and Fairfax County along the 95 and Route 1 corridor. And before being sworn into office, one of the main issues that future constituents, but at the time voters were coming to me, was saying, hey, we're having bicycle safety issues on the northern half of your district. Also, I own a daycare center outside of my home, and I cannot allow my children to ride bicycles up and down the sidewalk because we have a lot of people speeding through our neighborhood to the point where our cars have been damaged, a child got hit. So what are you going to do as a state representative in order to combat this issue? So me being a freshman delegate, I started asking questions, and the answer lied into just like what the senator said in New York. The state had the authority to allow localities to be able to lower that speed limit. So I put in the bill. Delegate Betsy Carr puts in the bill, and then I incorporated my bill in order to get it passed. Now,
Did we lose you again? Lose him again? Feel like it was just getting good, because the cool thing about this Virginia bill is that it allows the speed limit to be lowered on state-owned roads, which a lot of state laws will reserve the right of the state to determine speed limits on state-owned roads, even if communities have the ability to lower speed limits on roads that they own. I don't know if he is going to be able to rejoin, and I don't have the visual prompt of him being frozen.
can you hear me?
I do.
Okay. The joys of working at a federal office. Sometimes it works and sometimes it does not work. But where I left off was we sent the bill to the governor, and the governor added his amendments to the bill. And his amendment basically added a reenactment clause, basically saying the bill will not come effective until we can pass it again in 2025. Then he also wanted to do a study on the bill. And with Delegate Carr and I, we basically stated there isn't a need for a study. We already see the issues throughout the entire Commonwealth and across this nation. So what we need to do is put the power in the localities in order to allow them to reduce the speed limit. So we rejected the governor's amendment in May, and I think that was 99-0. So, both sides rejected the governor's amendment, and he ended up signing it into law. So come July 1st, that will be the new law of the land, allowing all localities in the Commonwealth of Virginia to lower speed limits if it's set at 25, no less than 15 miles per hour for residential and business districts, including state highways. So, it was an honor to be able to be a chief co-patron to this bill, and I've received a lot of praises from different people throughout the Commonwealth, because there's a difference of when you're running for office, you tell people the issues that you want to fight on, but to actually deliver on that promise, I think that takes a step further in order to make each community across the Commonwealth a walkable, livable, and something that you can bike to and through in order for everyone to get home safely.
Yeah, thank you so much for leading on this legislation. As a Virginia resident in the city of Roanoke, I appreciate it. I hope that my community takes advantage of the authority that your bill has given us, and we get some lower speed limits, in our downtown area, around our schools, or even in a residential district like the one I live in. So thank you so much for your leadership on this.
Absolutely. And what I will, if I could direct people on this call for anybody who lives in Virginia, we're already gearing up for the 2025 session. So I will encourage you to speak to your local senators and delegates relating to bicycle safety and how we can progress this even further for the 2025 session.
Yeah, we've got a great statewide group in the Virginia Bicycle Federation, and I think if we all raise our voices together, we can get some great advancements in the next session.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining. And so our final kind of speaker before we get into the reports and guidance parts of the webinar is Amy Cohen. Has been a great advocate in New York, a great advocate nationally through Families for Safe Streets. Just want to give you a little time here to talk about your experience. Thank you for being part of the Slow Roads Save Lives campaign, helping us kick it off last fall, and your continued advocacy in the state of New York and nationally.
Thank you. Well, we have made as a priority, speed management as a main focus of Families for Safe Streets. And in fact, our first fight was to get the speed limit lowered in New York State to 20 miles per hour. That was 10 years ago, and we compromised at 25. And my main message today is really do not give up. I know many of the people on the call today are advocates, and sadly, this is a long fight. So 10 years ago, we tried to get 20 miles per hour. We compromised at 25. 4 years ago, we went back. I was honored that Senator Hoylman asked if he could name the bill after my son. And it took a relentless advocacy campaign, but we were successful. And we were also successful at nearly the same time securing permission for the rest of the state to go to 25 miles per hour. So we were part of a statewide coalition that we led that fought for a bill that allowed cities, towns, and villages across New York State to lower their speed limit to 25. And I will say passing the bill was easier than implementation. The state DOT put up a ton of hurdles. New manual of uniform traffic control devices has afforded us an opportunity to really push through. So we've been providing guidance and technical assistance on how people can use those new regulations to implement at an affordable cost the lower speed limit, going around some of the challenges that New York State DOT has made, saying, you need an expensive engineering study. And we're saying, actually, that new MUTCD doesn't say you need an expensive one. You can, use speed limits too, etc. So again, my main message is don't give up, be creative, and keep fighting for slower speed limits because they make a difference. A year after my son was struck and killed right in front of our home, a 5-year-old boy was hit in the exact same location. And that was the year we had lowered the speed limit from 30 to 25. And that boy lived in mine different. Every mile per hour makes a difference, and it's critical work. So I look forward to hearing more about the new report that Lab has put out and the work that Jenny is doing. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for joining. And with that, I think that's a great segue to Jenny, who can kind of speak to some of the challenges of implementation and how our system has been set up to not produce lower speed limits, and how cities are fighting to change that and create implementation processes that really create slower speed limits, safer speed limits over time. And do I need to make you a host so you can share, Jenny?
Let me see if I'm able. Yeah, I have, it's disabled right now.
Okay. You should be the host now and hopefully able to share.
Okay, I will do, I'm going to share my screen in a moment, but first let me just introduce myself. My name is Jenny O'Connell. I'm the Associate Director of Programs at NACTO, which is the National Association of City Transportation Officials. I lead our road safety and Vision Zero work. And for those who don't know, NACTO is an association of almost 100 cities and transit agencies across North America. And we work with our cities to help them become cities that are places for people, that have safe, sustainable, accessible, and equitable transportation choices. And as part of that work, we do a lot of different things as an organization. In the early days of our organization, we were really focused on street design guidance, in particular for urban bikeway design. But in more recent years, we've turned some of our focus to policy. And a couple of years ago, we developed guidance that's the first ever guidance for setting speed limits in an urban context that uses a context-sensitive approach rather than the sort of infamous 85th percentile methodology. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what's in that guidance, but then I'm also going to actually begin with some of what Amy just mentioned has changed in the last couple of months with the federal regulations that are going to enable cities to be able to do more of the work that Delegate Henson and Senator Hoylman are authorizing the communities that they serve to be able to do. So I'm going to share my screen really quickly. I'm actually drawing from an older existing presentation, so I'm going to keep it in kind of like a drafty format. So the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices is a regulatory document that's developed by the Federal Highway Administration. The last update hadn't been since 2009. And in 2023, the Federal Highway Administration released their new update, which is the 11th edition. We worked really hard as an organization with our member cities to ask for a number of different things in the new revised version of the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices. We asked for the document to be reframed as a proactive safety regulation. We asked for a modernized method for setting speed zones. We asked for easier crosswalk installation. We asked for easier mid-block signal installation. We asked for a removal of a section, a whole new section on automated vehicles. We asked for the use of green bike lanes, red transit lanes, and asphalt art. We asked them to remove the geometric restrictions for bikeways and to change the update process for a more inclusive and transparent update every 4 years. And we got some of this, but some of it we didn't. And what I'm going to talk about today is one thing that we got that's really exciting, which is a modernized method for setting speed zones. So just in terms of nomenclature here, speed zones are street sections that have a different speed limit than that's established by statute. And these are set by an engineering study. So this is what the MUTCD section on speed zones now says. I won't read the whole thing for you, but I am going to summarize it with just a couple of sentences. Basically, it says that you are required to use an engineering study that considers roadway context. And roadway context is, roadway environment, roadway characteristics, geographic context, crash experience, speed distribution, and past speed studies. And this is a really, really important point. The MUTCD now says that when the 85th percentile speed is greater than the posted speed or has risen over time, you should consider design enforcement and other speed management changes to increase compliance. That's a really big deal because it's an acknowledgement that speed management has a lot to do with design, and that speed limits shouldn't be going up over time to accommodate those fastest drivers. And finally, again, this is a really, really important point, and this is really the authorizing piece of this regulation that is, we're hoping cities can grasp onto and utilize to reduce speed limits in their cities. The new MUTCD says that on urban and suburban arterials, you should not use the 85th percentile alone to set speed limits. So that's a really big departure from what the MUTCD has said in the past. Instead of that 85th percentile approach, jurisdictions can now use speed limit setting tools and methods such as expert systems and those that are consistent with the safe system approach as part of the required engineering study for a non-statutory speed limit. So the speed limit setting tool that we developed a couple of years ago, which is called City Limits, is something that can be used to do just that. It's guidance on how to set speed limits on urban streets using a safe systems approach. It offers 3 tools for setting speed limits on urban streets, setting a default speed limit on many streets at once, setting designated slow zones and sensitive areas, and setting corridor speed limits using a safe speed study. And the whole idea behind this guidance is that it's predicated on the frequency of conflict and the amount of activity on a particular corridor, and relies on this risk matrix to determine the appropriate posted speed. So you can see that on corridors that have a lot of conflict density and a lot of activity, those are going to be your urban core streets. Really, the speed limit shouldn't be higher than 20 miles per hour in order for that to be a safe operating speed for the street. Whereas when you start to see corridors where you have lower conflict density and lower activity, a speed limit up to as high as 35 miles per hour might be appropriate because you've got a little bit less interaction between people who are walking and biking and people who are driving inside of their motor vehicles. So just as an example of what that might look like, here's a high conflict, high density street. This one actually happens to be in Toronto. And in that street, we would say that the speed limit should be 20 miles per hour. And here's a moderate activity level. and moderate conflict density street in LA. This is actually the street that my sister lives on in LA. And we would say here, you know, maybe there's a little bit of room for this to go up to 25 miles per hour. So I encourage you to take a look at the city limits resource. It's one of a few that I would recommend taking a look at if you're working on setting speed zones in your cities. US Limits 2 is another tool that we are okay with cities using. It's a federally approved resource, and it's the best way for some cities to be able to set speed limits in their streets in a context sensitive way. It also looks at crash history and the way that the street looks in order to make a decision about what the maximum safe speed is. So I'm going to pause. I'm happy to answer questions about city limits, and I'll drop a link to it in the chat. I can always provide more detail for folks who want to get in touch with me after this webinar.
Jenny, thank you so much for that. Really appreciate the presentation. I think City Limits is a great report for everyone to use, and really how that's what I would point cities to use. US Limits 2 is also a good resource. Every state will be updating its MUTCD to comply with the federal MUTCD if it hasn't already. And every state will be making this big shift from looking mostly at that 85th percentile speed to having this context-based evaluation of speed limits, which is a very different approach to speed limits than we've had in the past in the United States. Is there anything else you would like to add before I share my screen and go over our resource? Okay. Then looks like I have control back. And so our Slow Roads Save Lives initiative is really about reframing road design from something that puts cars first, like the 85th percentile, to something that puts people and safety first, like that context-sensitive guidance that Jenny just went over. We think that this kind of initiative and this need to embrace slower speeds really goes from the individual level all the way to the national government level. So we have asked people to take a pledge in support of slower speeds as part of our Slow Roads Save Lives initiative. I encourage you to read the pledge, take it, think about how hard it can be to comply with speed limits in a system that has been set up where roads are not designed to necessarily achieve them. We don't always have a target speed for our roads, and we've kind of been letting the choices of drivers, oftentimes the choice to speed, leading to our speed limits and our road design that permits that. The other thing that our resource really digs into is the way we have speed limit laws at the state level that set the default speed limits for different types of districts, different types of contexts. And unfortunately, in the United States, many states, 14 states have set their urban district speed limit at 30 miles per hour, a speed at which 1 in 4 people hit can be expected to die. Some states have set it even higher. These are not always hard minimums, but they often make it hard for cities to set lower speed limits. They create barriers, they create procedures that cities have to go through every time they want to go lower than these default speed limits based on districts. So if we are looking at international public health recommendations, we would want to start at 20 miles per hour, which right now only 4 states start their urban district speed limits at 20 miles per hour. So there's a lot of advocacy, a lot of work that needs to be done if we are going to move state defaults down this risk curve so that every state starts at a safer speed, at that 20 mile per hour speed. And every city has the ability to implement safer speeds by right without doing additional procedures in order to justify a safer speed. So that really kind of informed our insight to do this mini report. We got support from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention to do the research, and we reviewed every state's speed limit laws to identify places where they currently set low speed limits that are 20 miles per hour or close to 20 miles per hour, and kind of think about how these types of speed limit laws could be a lever for change going forward to create safer speed limits. So what we found is in the report, and I'm just going to quickly show some of the maps that we developed. The urban and business district speed limits are generally talking about the same type of district, the same type of context. And these are the most widespread districts. Most states have them. There's about 8 states that don't do districts in their speed limit laws at all. And those are the only states that lack either an urban or a business district speed limit. So this is where actually 4 states have set it at 20. So Oregon, Alaska, I think Nebraska and Iowa have done that. And then many states have set it higher. New York State, thankfully, has reformed it so that cities have the ability to go to lower speed limits, but the state level policy kind of begins at 55, which is unfortunate. But luckily, cities don't have to follow that. Residential district speed limits are less widespread. They were recommended in something called the Uniform Vehicle Code for a number of years, but fewer years than urban or business districts. And so just fewer states have adopted them. They tend to be a little bit higher. There sometimes are weird inconsistencies where cities and counties have different residential speed limits, even though we're generally talking about the same type of development with a lot of housing, potentially kids playing in the street, that type of stuff. But sometimes you'll see counties have lower residential speed limits than cities. One of the interesting areas that we looked at is school zone speed limits. I was somewhat surprised that several states have limits on how slow school zone speed limits can go. And sometimes that is higher than 20 miles per hour, which is kind of our international standard for what is a good speed limit for a safe street where people are walking and biking. Particularly younger people who may not have the same experience, same mental development to be able to interact with vehicles in a safe way. And there are several states that don't have laws that specifically address school zone speed limits as well. So there are opportunities there for advocacy. And then finally, there are some states with kind of specific laws for alleys or types of park roads. These tend to be very specific in where they can be applied. They're not a particularly great leverage point for advocacy and change because they're so specific. But it is interesting that we've had a practice that was very much driven by the speed choices of drivers, coexisting with a practice where for years, for decades, legislatures have been willing to identify lower speed limits for some particular areas. And so hopefully we're starting to see that context-based approach being brought into the traffic engineering practice through those changes to the manual and uniform traffic control devices. And it'd be great to see legislators and legislatures kind of take the next step and lower some of these speed limits based on context to make the job of traffic engineers and planners easier to achieve those lower speeds. And our ultimate goal isn't just changing the number on the sign. We want road design to reflect these lower speed limits. We want roads to be signed for 20 and designed for 20 so that the driver naturally feels like 20 is the speed that they should go. And, we are actively looking at legislation. We want to support groups that are supporting this type of legislation. In this recent blog, you can read about the legislation in Virginia and New York that we featured at the beginning of this webinar. So we want to partner with you if you are advocating for this at the state level or at the city level. And yeah, it's an important movement that kind of resets the baseline of what is a safe street in the United States. So I think with that, we hopefully have some questions to answer. People can use the Q&A chat. And hopefully we'll get some more questions to talk about how slow roads save lives. So I'm gonna ask the first question, which also got a kind of second question. This person says Germany has extensive photo enforcement and seems to have good compliance with that. Their state, which is Connecticut, has limited permission for towns to use photo enforcement, and they're wondering if many states permit photo enforcement. If no one else wants to jump in with an answer, my understanding is that there are probably slightly over a dozen states with enabling legislation for photo speed enforcement. It is not clear that every state needs enabling legislation for photo speed enforcement. So there are many other states where there are local programs without specific state enabling legislation. And I know that New York City has the country's largest photo enforcement program. So if you'd like to speak about that.
I mean, I just want to echo the comment that, they have it in Germany and it makes a difference. That, there's huge number of studies out there that show it's been working in New York. There was just a study in Philadelphia where our chapter there fought for a pilot program on, the most dangerous strode there, Roosevelt Boulevard. It is proven to have people slow down, prevent crashes, prevent fatalities and injuries. It can be a fight, but I think a lot of places have led the way that it hopefully will make it easier for other places to replicate. There are often concerns around privacy. We've, addressed a lot of those in model legislation in New York and in California and Philadelphia and other places. So anyway, if anybody has any other follow-up questions, I put our email in the chat. I also did put in the chat that, I forgot to mention that, we are now a national organization and we have members from across the country. And if you are looking to fight for lower speed limits or automated enforcement, and you want to give a face to this crisis, we may have somebody in your community that we can connect you to.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think the California legislation was maybe several years in the making. I think it tried to address a lot of equity-related concerns around photo enforcement. There's a lot of kind of guardrails around how they're going to roll that out. So people who are interested in that type of concern, I think that's a great place to look for how they approached it and how that might be applicable to your city or your state. To make sure that you're doing photo enforcement in an equitable way or in a way that's transparent with good reporting and good communication around it.
I mean, these safe speed limits are really, they're the bedrock. They're the starting foundation. You want to have a safe speed limit, then you want to design around it. You want to use automated enforcement to ensure it's followed. But this is the starting place.
Yeah, well, one of the statistics that kind of really got me into slower speeds as an important part of being a bike advocate is a report from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration that showed overall in traffic deaths, about 30% of traffic deaths involve speeding. For people walking and biking, it's less than 10%. So speeding itself is absolutely dangerous and people should not do it. But at least the statistics around biking and walking deaths say that that speed limit itself is part of the danger to us. At least the way they report the data, for us, it is not speeding people in the same way that the drivers or occupants are impacted by speeding. It is that baseline of, do we have a safe speed on the road?
Right. There's also studies that show just lowering the speed limit, even if you did nothing else, people who are going 10 miles above the old speed limit, you know, even the high speeders, how fast they are going goes down. So it does just help, you know, that speed management and traffic calming approach.
Yeah, I wanted to answer the question that's here about whether lowering the speed limits on streets that aren't designed for that speed can have a positive effect. And this is related to some of what Amy and Ken have already started saying, which is that there are speed limits are part of the equation for speed management. Like Amy said, they kind of undergird the they are basically your best communications tool for what you think the safe maximum speed on a street should be. And a lot of different changes can happen because of the reduced speed limit. So in some places, you know, there are certain speed management, physical speed management treatments that are ineligible on streets that have higher speed limits, because for a street that has a higher speed limit where you would expect a driver to go that speed, it basically makes it impossible for an engineer or planner to install something that would reduce the speeds physically. So it creates this vicious cycle of the speeds are high, so you can't implement traffic calming treatments. So there's value in implementing lower speeds, even if the street is designed in such a way that encourages higher speeds. That said, I think that one thing that's really important to note in the revised MUTCD is something I mentioned, and I'll just say it again, is that street design is really, really, really important for speed management. And the MUTCD is now explicitly saying that if you are finding as an engineer or planner that on your streets, the speeds are exceeding the 85th percentile, that does not mean that you should raise the 85th percentile, which was the guidance in the past. And instead, that means that you should start considering what designs to implement to bring the operating speeds of the street in line with the posted speed limit of the street. And that's a really important piece, because many streets in the United States are designed for high speeds and heavy volumes. And sometimes reducing the speed limit doesn't really make sense for the way that a street is designed. But there is a virtuous cycle in reducing the speed limits and redesigning the street, even if it's incremental, that can bring speeds down over time. So I just want to kind of like tie those threads together with the design.
I mean, there's another question too to tie in, like, right, you set your speed limit, then you have automated or enforcement, you design your roadways. And the third is a new element, which is you put devices in vehicles so that people can't speed. And there are two efforts in this regard that, you know, our chapters across the country are supporting. In New York and in Washington, D.C., we've been fighting for what we call speed limiters for repeat offenders. So people who repeatedly speed would be mandated to have a device installed in their vehicle, which will make it that they can't go more than, in New York, I think it's 10, and in DC, it's 5 miles an hour over the speed limit. And it's modeled after what people have done with drunk driving and ignition interlocks, right? You take the worst of the worst offenders and you say, you can still keep your car, you can still get around and go to work, but you got to do so safely. And literally you press the pedal and the car will not go faster. We did a demonstration in our state capitol in Albany a couple of weeks ago for state legislators. We had a car with the device installed, and people tried to speed on the local roads and on the highway, and they couldn't believe it really worked. You know, the speed limit changed and the device adjusted. In California, our chapters are supporting a bill that actually would mandate the same device, what's called intelligent speed assistance, in all new vehicles, and it did pass the California Senate. May not move fully this year. I guess we will still see, but it would be a first of its kind and really set a precedent that we need to be managing for speed. It starts with speed limits and it's supplemented with these other approaches.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think it is, we need all these tools working together. We need to treat speed like it matters in the way that it does. You know, our old approach was really based off of the feelings of drivers and their choices to speed, and having our policies say whatever they chose was okay. But we know that slower speeds save lives, and we need to use tools that are available to us to manage speeds so that we are achieving those slower speeds that will create safe streets. I think it's great that California and Washington, D.C. and New York are pursuing that. It's the type of thing that we could see at the federal level. When we look to our peers in Europe, they have regulations that require intelligent speed assist in all new cars throughout the EU. It's the type of thing that we could do in America. I've been in conversations about automated vehicles and the framework for how they will be regulated in the future. And automakers have said that they need to allow their automated vehicles that are incredibly sophisticated and can obey the speed limit. They say that they need to speed so that they can keep up with speeding drivers. And if we kind of lose that plot of why we have safe speeds, why we have speed limits, and that speed limits matter, I worry how dangerous that makes our already very dangerous streets. I want to pivot to a different question about how does community design like speed limits impact physical activity. This was one of the interesting things in our report about setting speed limits for health and safety. If you look at surveys about why people walk or don't walk, bike or don't bike, their concern for safety is usually the first or second reason is given for why people don't walk or bike more. And often the speed of traffic is the #1 reason that people don't feel safe. So lowering speed limits, creating slower speed traffic can help people walk and bike more, can help people feel more confident getting physical activity. So there's not just the positive safety benefits, there's the positive health benefits of people feeling more able to walk and bike and enjoy their communities without high-speed traffic. So I wanted to make sure that I addressed that. I also see a question about what does it mean to partner with the league? So the league has some tools to do kind of form or semi-automated emails to elected officials. That can get down to the mayoral or city council or administrator level as long as we are provided with their contact information. Our tool just gets national and state by default. We also are happy to work with groups to develop materials, whether that's a one-pager or something else that explains the issue. You should feel free to steal and reuse our kind of resources that we've developed for this campaign. The graph that I showed earlier, or any of our slides from our Slow Roads Saves Lives webinars. And I'm always happy to answer questions and engage with advocates who are working at their city or state level to lower speed limits. So my email is ken@bikeleague.org, and just reach out if you want to partner. I see a question for Jenny that asks about street design versus other tools for managing speed, especially public-facing communication. Would you like to comment on that?
Sure. Yeah, I think I mean, this kind of goes back to what I was saying a few minutes ago, just that the idea in a safe system approach, and the idea of Vision Zero is a multi-sided approach. It's not, I think Amy's been doing a really good job articulating how speed limits fits into that. And I think you can think about design in the same way. Design is really effective because it's a physical change to the street that essentially forces drivers to drive in a certain way. So a speed hump is a really good example. A vertical deflection, like a chicane, is another really good example. But I think it's a good point that street design alone is not the only. None of these tools in isolation are going to be the solution to the speed issues that we have on our streets. And I think in particular, sort of one area that some people have focused on, but that we haven't really, I think, wrapped our head around completely as an industry, is the cultural impact, or the cultural side of speed and speeding. We have definitely inspired a culture, in particular in the US, that speed is fun and it's exciting, and our cars are designed to go way faster than they need to go. And I think that is not an insignificant piece of the speed management equation, and it's something that I think that the industry is struggling a little bit to grapple with and figure out how to deal with. But I just want to emphasize that that design is one very critical tool. Speed limit reduction is a very critical tool. I think the automated speed enforcement cameras are a critical tool. I think that public-facing education is a critical tool. I think that infrastructure like the intelligent speed assist is a critical tool. So this is not a problem that has a one singular solution. It's but the thing that is interesting about speeding and speed management and high speeds is that we really know what the tools are to reduce speeds, and we need advocacy and decision makers, and legislators to be able to really push hard for the tools that we know are effective at reducing speeds and saving lives.
I just want to chime a little bit on the culture change piece. When you look at other countries who were on par with us with, the number of people dying based on the size per capita traffic fatalities, they drove them down and culture followed, right? They put in place the tools, and then it just became socially unacceptable to speed. It wasn't easy to do so. You got a lot of automated camera tickets. The road wasn't designed for it. The speed limit went down. So culture follows policy, not really the other way around. Assuming the other way around feels like you just throw up your hands, or you're going to throw more education campaigns at people. I regularly say, if education campaigns worked, then everybody I knew and everybody in my extended family should be the safest drivers on the road, and they are not always. Right? We need those upstream solutions to change the behavior. The culture will follow.
Yeah, thank you both for that. And I think that it's totally true. If we are preaching one thing and our policies and our investments are not trying to also get slower speeds, people can tell that there's a disconnect there, that we're saying don't speed, but here's a 4-lane road with 12-foot wide lanes that we signed for 25 miles per hour, that everyone knows everyone is going to speed on that road because it looks like a racetrack. Like, it has to be with consistency. We can't just say one thing and do another and not build the slower, safer streets. So I think it's really important to use all the tools. And I think it's really important that we lead with policy change. We lead with road design that actually gets people to slow down. and people will feel that consistency and hopefully start changing their culture as they see their world change, reflecting that we actually prioritize slower speeds in order to save lives. And I think that's been missing too often in the United States. And I guess I know there's a question here about good resources to educate would-be speeders about why they should drive slower. I think that is a need that's part of the public education component. I think we tend to focus in the United States on do bad thing, get punished. That is the bread and butter of our communications around why people shouldn't speed, why people should put on a seatbelt, why people shouldn't drink drive. I'm a big believer that we need more positive communications about why you should not speed for your own reasons or for your family or for things that you care about, not just because you'll be punished. I know we have 2 minutes left, and I know there's a few questions remaining. I want to ask Amy and Jenny if you want to give any closing thoughts before we're about to end, and then I'll do a quick end to the webinar.
Just what I said before, don't give up. I have been shocked to learn how slow change is and how it can feel so frustrating. But for those of you who are, advocates from bicycling groups across the country as part of the League of American Bicyclists, keep up the fight for safe streets. Organize and mobilize, build coalitions, get other people on board who support these policies. They're proven to work, and we just need to harness the will of our political leaders to put them in place.
Thanks. All right. So I want to thank everyone for attending. I want to thank our National Bike Summit sponsors. They have helped us have ongoing webinars throughout the year. So thank you to all of the great companies and organizations that are listed on this slide who have made it possible for the League to continue to engage in this campaign. It really is a fundamental issue that we have the ability to set safe speed limits and that we build our culture around designing safer roads on top of what is a safe speed. So it was really great to hear from the elected officials and Jenny and Amy and everyone fighting for those safer speeds. We really do believe 20 miles per hour is plenty. It is a safe speed where more than 90% of people walking will survive if hit at that speed. And that's one of the reasons that it's so important to be able to do in communities throughout the United States. And it's a shame that it's so hard to do in so many of those communities right now. So with that, I just want to, again, thank everyone for joining this webinar on setting speeds for health and safety. And I hope you have a great day. And please reach out if you are advocating for safer speeds in your community at the state level. Thank you.